I posted an Instagram reel last week, a 60-second video which was part 1 of which I wanted to be a series, and it went viral. Granted, on my old account that was before big tech axed it at its heels. The video explained, in general, some shady things regarding the whole Titanic story. You can watch the video for yourself. Many of you, after watching this, wanted a part 2 to this video, but frankly, 60 seconds is just not enough to get into the details. And that is why, in this mini documentary, we're going to dive deep into the mystery of the sinking ship. Now, before we get into this video is purely speculative. It's open for conjecture. Hey, you can even call me a crazy conspiracy nut. I say this to say, don't believe a word of this video. I just encourage you to conduct your own self-research and see what you find for yourself. Before we can even speak about the Titanic and the series of events that unfolded before its calamitous sinking, we must take ourselves back to the date 1910, where 7 men held a secret meeting that would not only change the lives of every American, but the lives of every future generation around the world. That is, the secret meeting at Jekyll Island, which set the foundations of the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank.
Nelson Aldrich, Benjamin Strong Jr., Piet Andrew, Henry Davidson, Arthur Shelton, Frank Vanderlip, and Paul Warburg met at the Jekyll Island Club off the coast of Georgia to write a plan to reform the nation's banking system. The meeting and its purpose were closely guarded secrets, and participants did not admit that the meeting occurred until the 1930s. But the plan written on Jekyll Island laid a foundation for what would eventually be the Federal Reserve System. One could call the Federal Reserve a cartel, and that its primary interest is to advance the goals of the cartel itself. This attribution has been stated many times by Edward G. Griffin, the author of the book Creatures of Jekyll Island, which details the sinister plot behind the meeting that took place that secretive day.
In standard education, meaning Rockefeller indoctrination, we're taught that the Federal Reserve Bank was created to alleviate financial crises that became frequent prior to its establishment, and to provide a more centralized control over the financial system, aka the banks. Well, let's just break apart that story, and we'll start by a quote from Edward G. Griffin. The accepted version of history is that the Federal Reserve was created to stabilize our economy. One of the most widely used textbooks on this subject says, it sprang from the panic of 1907. With its alarming epidemic of bank failures, the country was fed up once and for all with the anarchy of unstable private banking. Even the most naive student must sense a grave contradiction between this cherished view and the system's actual performance. Since its inception, it has presided over the crashes of 1921 and 1929, the Great Depression of 29 to 39, recessions in 53, 57, 69, 75 and 81, a stock market Black Monday in 87, and 1,000% inflation which has destroyed 90% of the dollar's purchasing power. So, as you can see, the Federal Reserve failed at its main duty till this date, which was to provide financial stability for the American dollar. Secondly, the 7 men who secretly plotted the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank were some of the richest men in the country with banking interests themselves. In other words, the Federal Reserve Bank and all the rules within were created by banksters to control banking behavior. Go figure. It reminds me of the quote, "Those with the gold make the rules." That's the golden rule. So, if the Federal Reserve Bank didn't stabilize the American economy, nor take the power away from the power-hungry bankers, then what did it actually do? Today, the Federal Reserve Bank has a colossal power over the American economy, and the rest of the world too. It's responsible for absurd inflation, economic bubbles, and bailing out their banking buddies. It keeps the wealthy wealthy and the working class limited to their potential. It just about controls the lives of every American citizen, politician, corporation, market, and a whole lot more. That's what it did. It consolidated power in the hands of just a few men. So, you're probably wondering by now, what does this all have to do with the Titanic?
The idea of a Federal Reserve System wasn't completely accepted by the entire population. Those with other financial interests knew this could wreak havoc on the economy. And a centralization of money supply smells like a disaster waiting to happen. So, as you can imagine, many prominent men during the early 1900s also opposed its creation. Three of the more notable men who had grown to great riches opposed the creation of the Federal Reserve vehemently. These men were John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isa Strauss. All three men died on the Titanic that fateful night. Is it a coincidence that three of the most powerful men that opposed the secret plan died on the unsinkable ship? Well, let's look deeper, shall we?
J.P. Morgan, one of America's largest financiers and a huge political influencer, and of course a bankster, was a key character involved in this conspiracy. Conspiracy in quotations, that is. Not only did he own the private lodge on Jekyll Island, where the secret meeting took place, he was one of the biggest advocates for the Federal Reserve Bank. According to Investopedia, he ultimately forced the government into acting on the central banking plans. Did I forget to mention, he also owned White Star Lines, the company that built the Titanic? According to this article from historyonthenet.com, in 1902 the company was bought by a wealthy American, J. Pierpont Morgan. Ismay retained his position within the firm as managing director, Ismay being the previous owner of White Star Lines. Morgan's money meant that the company could build large luxury liners to attract the wealthy passengers. In 1907, Ismay suggested that the company build two liners which were heavier, bigger, and more luxurious than any other ship in the world. They were to be called the Olympic and Titanic. If these were successful, a third gigantic, later renamed Britannic, would follow. I can't help but wonder about the fact that they had this genius idea to build the biggest and most luxurious ship a few years prior to the secret meeting. So, JP Morgan pushes for the creation of the Federal Reserve, has a genius idea to create a luxurious, unsinkable ship 2 to 3 years prior to the disaster. On board that ship were three of his greatest threats to the sinister plan, and all three men died on that night. It seems oddly suspicious, come to think of it, but this is just the surface. There are many more facts to this puzzling story. Let's take a look.
JP Morgan was actually booked to be on the Titanic in one of the parlor suites, which were one of the most luxurious suites on the entire ship. However, he cancelled his reservation days before it set sail. The information is unclear as to why he cancelled or the actual date he cancelled. There seems to be a lot of confusion on this matter. My observation shows that mainstream fact-checking websites, such as Reuters, claim it wasn't days before, and alternative news platforms suggest it was. You can be the judge of this yourself. Either way, he cancelled, and that's interesting alone. A powerful man like JP Morgan had a lot of friends who also had their own companies, and one of them was Milton Hershey. The world's most famous chocolate bar was started by Milton Hershey, and his business would dominate the sweet tooth industry. A side note, an industry that would appease the addictions and desires of man, keep them craving for satiation, and an industry heavily contributable to man's health problems. But we'll leave that for another time. Milton Hershey also cancelled his reservation. Is it possible that JP Morgan warned his good old business associate? Many sources suggest that Mr. Hershey cancelled under business matters. This is highly perplexing because this is supposed to be one of the greatest events to happen in that era, an unsinkable, gigantic ship to sail over the Atlantic, and the first ever to do so. It was a luxurious boat too, with many wealthy and prominent men on board. I'm sure it would have also served as a great networking opportunity for these business moguls. For him to cancel last minute, just as JP Morgan did, his friend who owns the colossal ship, is more than bizarre.
3 of the 7 men that attended the Slithery meeting on Jekyll Island in 1910, Charles D. Norton, Benjamin Strong, and Henry Davison, were all in a close association with JP Morgan. And it is suggested that these 3 men went to represent JP Morgan. Quick research can show you their connection with JP Morgan himself, as many of them managed his companies and trusts. Nelson Aldrich and Frank Vanderlip represented the Rockefeller dynasty, as Nelson Aldrich was the father-in-law to the American financier John Davison Rockefeller Jr. Frank Vanderlip, president of the National City Bank of New York, representing William Rockefeller and the international investment banking house of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Paul Warburg, a partner of Kuhn, Loeb and Company, a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France, and the brother of Max Warburg, who was the head of the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. These 7 men were tentacles of much more powerful families that have an agenda to rule over society by infiltrating major industries and markets around the world. The Rockefeller dynasty, the Rothschilds family, and the Morgans. These 3 families alone hold tremendous wealth and power that influence major political, scientific, and societal decisions.
Another part to this endless puzzle has to do with the Serbian inventor and forgotten genius, Nikola Tesla. If you're watching this video, you're most likely familiar with Nikola Tesla's work. If not, you have definitely been influenced by his inventions. Some of Tesla's most notable inventions were his AC power, alternating current, Tesla coil, magnifying transmitter, Tesla turbine, shadowgraph, radio, neon lamp, hydroelectric power, induction motor, and radio-controlled boat. The TV remote in your room to the military-grade weapons systems have all manifested through the great mind of Nikola Tesla.
Here is where the puzzle gets puzzling. Both JP Morgan and Jacob Astor were funding Nikola Tesla's work, and Jacob Astor was revered as a great friend of Nikola Tesla himself. According to TeslaUniverse.com, in March 1901, Tesla agreed terms with JP Morgan for $150,000, which is around $4.5 million in today's currency. In exchange, Tesla would be required to hand over 51% in interest for his patents and inventions to JP Morgan. John Jacob Astor was also one of Tesla's wealthiest and most generous investors. He invested $100,000 in 1899 for Tesla to, as he understood it, further develop and produce a new lighting system. Tesla instead used the money to fund his Colorado Springs experiments. Jacob Astor was understandably unhappy with Tesla's deception and avoided him for several years. they later reconciled and worked together on aircraft and propulsion systems in 1908. It is believed that JP Morgan cut Tesla's funding in 1901 after Tesla's ambitions became too lofty and conflicted with JP Morgan's other interests. Big oil. Tesla wanted free electricity for everyone, but this wouldn't serve the money-hungry oligarchs at the time. Nikola Tesla was defunded and basically reduced to destitution by his investors who pulled out on him. JP Morgan and Westinghouse and so forth, who pulled out on him when they realized that the worldwide energy system that he was trying to develop was something that could not be metered and monetized. And this was, of course, in the age of discovery of petroleum and Rockefeller as the first magnate of the petroleum industry, and there was a killing to be made in oil and other non-renewable sources. So Tesla was reduced to destitution and misery for wanting to be a benefactor of humanity. Jason Reza Georgiani.
With John Jacob Astor close to Tesla and being one of his more ambitious investors, could JP Morgan see his relationship as a threat to his global empire? It is clear by now that John Jacob Astor was a real thorn in the side of JP Morgan. With his widely known concerns about the Federal Reserve Bank and his interest and friendship with Nikola Tesla, the man who was on the brink of creating free electricity for the entire world, JP Morgan had to do something about his opposition. Right? That's how business works, and history has always shown us the rage man has when it comes to removing his opponents, especially when it interferes with business. Again, this is all speculation, but using our God-given discernment, we can almost put the pieces to the puzzle together. And the picture becomes clearer each and every time we do that. Is it possible that JP Morgan killed two birds with one stone, and that stone was to sink the unsinkable ship? Is it possible that with John Jacob Astor out the way, JP Morgan could go on and continue his global business dominance?
There are many other facts about the story we've been told regarding the Titanic, pondered off as coincidence, that paint a very sinister plot to the story. Facts such as Captain E.J. Smith ignored multiple iceberg warnings from his crew and other ships. Getting from England to New York as fast as possible was a goal number one at the behest of his boss, Joseph Bruce Ismay, managing director of the White Star Line. Ismay had pressure from his boss, JP Morgan, owner of White Star Line. By the way, Ismay survived the catastrophe. Or another fact, once the Titanic struck the iceberg, the captain and his crew used white flares to signal distress. Unfortunately, white flares are not the colour used to signal distress. Red flares are. They're always used to show distress. So the closest ship, the Californian, ignored the flares, assuming it was a celebratory signal rather than an emergency. Oops. Just two other coincidences, I guess. If you're like me, your eyebrows are raising. You're questioning the official story because it is clear mainstream educational sources don't want us knowing about these connections. What are they trying to hide? When you trace the rabbit hole, you only come to one conclusion, and that is they're hiding the truth. The truth that the creation of one of the biggest conduits for control the world has ever seen, the Federal Reserve Bank. Or is everything that I have presented to you in this video an utter lie? Does the rabbit hole go deeper? What if I told you, after researching and reaching the deep catacombs of the internet world, I found information that suggests the Titanic never even sank? What if I told you that the whole story was fabricated using fake imagery and falsified news articles? Would you want to find out more? If you want a part 2 of this compelling story, please consider liking, commenting, and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I will catch you in the next video.